Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. In this video, we're going to be talking about the theory of comparative advantage, which is one of the most fundamental and crucial theories in international trade. It was given by a very famous economist, David Ricardo, where he mathematically proved that if one country has an absolute advantage in both the goods, then trade could still be beneficial for both the countries if they trade based on the comparative advantages. So, what he did was that he considered the opportunity cost of production and then he used this concept to explain in his theory of comparative advantage. Now, let's see what comparative advantage actually is. So, guys, a country is said to have a comparative advantage in the production of a good if that country can produce the good at a lower opportunity cost than the other country. Now let's look at this by way of an example. So guys, over here I've taken two countries, France and Poland, and let's say France is making 3 liters of wine and 4 kilos of cheese. So basically France can either, if you have seen my previous video on absolute advantage, I mentioned this point, that these are basically your opportunity cost ratios. I mean, it's representing your opportunity cost in the sense that the maximum France could go is, it could go 3 liters of wine with zero cheese, right? While it could go with 4 kilos of cheese with zero wine, and Poland could go 1 liters of wine with zero cheese and 3 kilos of cheese with zero wine, right? So these are your opportunity cost ratios, right? Now, it can be quite clearly seen that France has an absolute advantage both in wine and cheese, because to recall, absolute advantage is when you can produce something using the same resources with greater quantity. So definitely France can make more wine and it can make more cheese as well from Poland. So the question arises, what's the point of trading with Poland and France specializing in only one good while Poland in the other good, and then they're both importing and exporting from each other? What's the point of that when France already has an app, when it can make both the goods in a higher quantity as compared to Poland? But here, what David Ricardo's theory proves mathematically. He said that I can mathematically prove to France that trade would be beneficial. France would be better off if it specialized only in one good and let Poland specialize in the other good, in which they both have the respective comparative advantage, and then trade with a suitable trading ratio. And both these countries would be better off in that sense, right? So let's see how would that work. So what you need to what you need to do is that you need to calculate the opportunity. So already you have the opportunity cost ratios over here, 3 and 4, 1 and 3. But in order to find the comparative advantage, do one thing: find the opportunity cost. So these are the opportunity cost ratios of, like, for France it's like the opportunity cost of 3 liters of wine is 4 cheese, right? But for to find out the comparative advantage properly, do one thing: calculate the opportunity cost for both these countries for 1 liter of wine. And you could also do it for cheese. Calculate the opportunity cost for both these countries for producing 1 kilo of cheese. So let's calculate the opportunity cost ratios for 1 liter of wine for both these countries. So obviously, if France can produce 3 wines with 4 and compromising 4 cheese instead, then if it produces 1 wine, then how many cheese would it want to compromise? So you divide 4 by 3. So the answer is that for every wine France makes, it has to compromise 1.3 cheese. And same goes for Poland. Already it's given for 1 liter of wine. So if Poland makes 1 wine, it has to compromise on 3 kilos of cheese. And same goes if we calculate the opportunity cost for cheese. So in order to calculate the opportunity cost of cheese, we need to see that if you make 1 cheese, then how many wine you need to forego. So if France makes 4 cheese, it compromises on 3 liters of wine. So what would happen if you make 1 cheese? If France makes 1 cheese, then the opportunity cost would be, you divide 3 by 4, and the answer would be that France would sort of compromise 0.75 wine if it makes 1 cheese, and Poland would compromise 0.3 wine if it makes 1 cheese, right? So you have the opportunity cost ratios in front of you, so it's important that you find the opportunity cost of 1 wine or the opportunity cost of 1 cheese. In both ways, you can find the respective comparative advantage. It's up to you. So if you look at the opportunity cost ratios for producing 1 unit for 1 wine, then you can clearly see that France has a comparative advantage in wine. Why? Because if France makes 1 wine, it has to compromise only on 1.3 cheese, while if Poland makes 1 wine, it has to compromise on 3 cheese, right? 3 kilos of cheese. So France definitely has to compromise on less cheese as compared to Poland and still make the same quantity of wine as Poland. So definitely France has a comparative advantage in wine, and if it has a comparative advantage in wine, then definitely Poland has a comparative advantage in cheese because the thing is that Poland could end up making 3 cheese while compromising on 1 wine, while France could only end up making 1.3 cheese while compromising the same 1 wine. So definitely Poland has an upper hand in terms of comparative advantage in cheese production, right? So Poland should specialize in cheese while France should specialize in wine. And let's see that if we can prove the same comparative advantages if we calculate the opportunity cost ratios for one cheese, right? So if you calculate the opportunity cost ratios for one cheese, you have 0.75:1, which simply means that in order to make one cheese, France has to forego 0.75 wine, while Poland, in order to make one cheese, has to forego 0.3 wine, right? So definitely Poland has to forego less wine to make the same one cheese. So Poland should specialize in cheese, while then France has to specialize in wine, because France has a competitive advantage in wine. We can also prove this as well from opportunity cost ratio for cheese, because the thing is that France could end up making more wine, that is 0.75 wine, by foregoing the same one cheese, while Poland could only end up making 0.3 wine while foregoing the same one cheese. So definitely France has a comparative advantage in wine production, while Poland has a comparative advantage in cheese production. So definitely, so the first step is to calculate the opportunity cost ratios, and then you figure out what country has a comparative advantage in what, right? Now guys, there is one very important thing that I need to tell you, that in MCQs usually they give a PPC diagram and they ask you to sort of find out which country has a comparative advantage in what, and mostly the students do that by calculating the opportunity cost ratio, which is absolutely not wrong, that is right. But then there's a shortcut to it, or in fact I would call it a trick, and that trick will always work. I need to teach you that, so pay attention to this very carefully. So guys, I've written the same opportunity cost ratios, for example 3 wine and 4 cheese for France, and I've made a PPF for France and for Poland. So we have wine on the y-axis and cheese on the x-axis, and this is representing the PPF for France, which is representing their respective maximum quantities, and also reflecting the opportunity cost ratios as well. And this is the PPF for Poland, 1 and 3. Now, if you were to sort of find out that which country has a comparative advantage in what, you would generally do it by calculating the opportunity cost ratios. But now let's see what is that trick. So I want you to look at the PPFs very carefully and find out that on which axis you see the highest distance between the two PPFs. So you have two PPFs, but on which axis do you see the highest distance or the gap between these PPFs? So you have one distance over here, which is the gap between these two PPFs, and then you have one distance over here, which is also the gap between these two PPFs. So obviously the vertical axis, that is the wine axis or the y-axis, has the highest gap between, or the distance between, these two PPFs as compared to this distance, because this distance is larger, right? It's bigger. So once you have identified that the wine axis has the highest gap between these two PPFs, the next thing is to identify that which country is producing the highest quantity on that axis. Now obviously the highest quantity that is being produced on the wine axis is, because right now all our cameras are focused on the wine axis, the highest quantity that is being produced on the wine axis is 3 wine, right? And who is producing that? France is producing that, which means simply that France has a comparative advantage in the production of wine. See, how cool is that? Very shortcut trick, and this will help you identify the comparative advantages in MCQs very quickly. So obviously once you've identified that France has a comparative advantage in wine production, then definitely Poland would have a comparative advantage in cheese production, right? So I've written this down as well, that this is the trick over here. You don't need to do these numerical calculations. Find out the axis that has the biggest gap between these two PPFs, number 1. Number 2, for example in our case it is a wine axis. Number 3, whoever is producing more on that axis, obviously whichever country is producing more on that axis, has got the comparative advantage in whatever is being produced on that axis. So wine is being produced on that axis, and whoever is producing wine, the highest wine on that axis, has a comparative advantage in wine production, right? So obviously France is producing the most wine, that is 3 on our wine axis, hence France has a comparative advantage in wine. And this trick will always help you, it will never fail you. Believe me, you can apply that, use that, see for yourself in MCQs. It is going to work always. Now guys, in my coming video, we're going to see how France and Poland would benefit when they trade with each other, and how both these countries would be better off. So that video would be based on the gains from trade being made. If you enjoyed this video and you like this trick as well, so definitely do mention it in the comments. I would appreciate that, and I wish you all the best.